Hello there and welcome once again to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett along with Kent Myers. We're here every week meeting interesting people and dealing with topical issues, and today we're going to grab our fingerprints and put them all over the political races of 2014.
We are. We did a show before the election with Professor Keith Gaddie at the University of Oklahoma Political Science Department, the department chair, and he made his predictions. And we then advertised that we were going to check on his predictions when we brought him back. Well, we're bringing him back today, but I hasten to say he had a perfect score. He didn't miss any, so we're not going to make any, we're going to get him on anything. He had it right. But we're going to talk about the outcome of the recent November election and what to expect.
And where this leads us going forward.
Yes.
And is Oklahoma evolving in one direction or another? Keith Gaddie, our guest today on The Verdict. We'll be right back.
I've been fortunate enough to premiere every film that I've produced at Sundance. Seeing your film on the big screen for the first time in front of an audience at the Sundance Film Festival is unmatched. I'm Chad Burris. I'm an attorney, a film producer, film financier, economic development financier, and I'm Chickasaw. Nobody can argue that modern day media, cinema, has perpetuated this myth, this idea of the Indian and what that is. And just the idea that, all Indians look one way or all Indians act one way is a terrible injustice. Being able to have filmmakers tell stories that are representative of some element of his surroundings, his upbringing, what they know, what they see through their own eyes, that other people get a chance to bear witness to around the world. I think that's amazing. For me personally, being an Indian today means being responsible, honest, progressive, and giving that back to the community.
Learn more about today's Chickasaws at profilesofenation.com.
It's a North American energy revolution. We're the fastest growing source of new oil and natural gas supplies in the world.
The shift to North American energy will create approximately 3 million jobs.
All that money we've been sending overseas, $400 billion a year. Imagine that staying in our economy. It's a game changer.
Real energy independence starts now, and it starts with Oklahoma.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
As we talked about in the open, we're really glad to have back on the set of The Verdict Professor Keith Gaddie, who is the head of the Political Science Department at the University of Oklahoma. Keith was on a show with us a few weeks ago before the election and talked through some of the races, and now we're going to kind of review that and see how that turned out and what to expect for the future. Keith did his undergraduate work at Florida State University and did his master's and PhD work at the University of Georgia. He has taught a couple of places, including Tulane, before finally settling in Oklahoma, at Norman at the University of Oklahoma. He began his tenure there in 1996. He's a frequent lecturer and guest on radio and television shows. He lectures a good bit around outside the university, is a prolific writer and a genuine scholar in the area of political science. Keith, welcome back. Glad to have you.
Kent, Mick, good to be back.
For your 5th appearance.
Yes, yeah. So, I look forward to getting my victory trophy to take home. It's always good. It's just like Saturday Night Live for the 5th appearance.
That's it.
Carries special benefits.
Yeah, well, just
Very
wait
good.
outside. We'll
Yes,
have
sir.
it for you.
Yes, sir.
Let's start with some general reactions to the November elections.
Well, the Democrats may not be dead, but they sure act like a zombie, don't they? And not just locally, but nationwide, the Democrats had a really bad day on Election Day. And here in state, You know, if you look at the outcome, win or lose, it was not a good day for the Democrats. Governorship, Mary Fallin was comfortably reelected, albeit with about a 6-point loss on her reelection total and with a far smaller number of ballots cast. All the statewide offices went Republican, and in particular, the state Senate now has 40 Republican lawmakers out of 48. There are 8 Democrats left in the state Senate, which means we could gather them around this table to play poker and probably still have room for one more player. I mean, the Democrats look like a dying species up at 2300 Lincoln.
Well, did the turnout surprise you, or were you expecting that kind of a low turnout?
We were expecting low turnout, and there are a lot of reasons why. First of all, a gubernatorial election, a governor running for re-election in the state always has a much lower turnout than the previous election. So with Frank Keating's re-election, Brad Henry's re-election, we saw turnout somewhere in the 850 to 900,000 vote range. The turnout on this one was even less than that, so it's not unexpected that turnout would be low. There were a lot of uncontested state legislative races, a lot of uncontested county races. There were not a lot of drivers to really push people out to come out and vote from the bottom up. So it's not especially surprising we had low turnout, but you know, we've got a bigger problem in Oklahoma when it comes to voter turnout, which is that in the early 1990s, voter participation in the U.S. started to go up, and even kept going up until President Obama's initial election. And it tapered off a bit the last 2 elections. Here in Oklahoma, voter turnout has just generally been going down. We've had a downward trend in these types of midterms where the governor is running for re-election. We've had a downward trend when we've got an open seat for governor. We've had a downward trend in presidential elections. We've got a problem with people being eligible to vote and not registering. We've got a problem with people being eligible to vote and not voting in the state, and we're not sure why. But we need to look into it, and we need to fix it.
Is there less money going into campaigns than there is in other states?
Well, that's the problem. Is there's plenty of money going into the campaigns. There's plenty of information out there, but people are not showing up, and it may have to do with how the money is being spent. If all that money is going into direct mail and efforts to target particular voters, particular high propensity voters, we end up ignoring everybody else. I mean, person-to-person contact's the best way to get somebody to vote. Go and ask them, right? And here in Oklahoma, we like to see our politicians sweat. That's the old saw. The voter targeting operations just didn't work the way we would have expected. And I haven't had a chance to talk to the Democrats about what they were doing with regard to their targeting, but with the Republicans targeting, I would assume they ran their old 72-hour campaign that they've always run at the end of the day, but that mobilization is dependent on landlines to contact, and fewer people have them.
Yeah.
So the old tools that we used to use to mobilize voters may not be working so well. We may have to get back to one at a timing it.
Was the weather any kind of significant factor in the turnout?
Well, you know, I was talking with a major Democrat who indicated his belief that the weather was definitely a factor in depressing turnout. But I also know that the Democrats were expecting 170,000 more people to show up than did show up, and I really have a hard time believing that the rain we had on the morning of Election Day accounted for that much depression, that it depressed voter turnout almost 20 points. That's a little difficult to swallow.
Well, just personal experience, my wife and I were going to vote together, and it was raining that morning, so we decided to do it that afternoon and went expecting to have to wait, expecting to have heavy turnout because everybody waited till the afternoon to do it. Not so. I mean, we just got right in and got out. There just wasn't hardly anybody there.
Well, I voted in the rain, and as you would expect, I was pretty much alone. It was me and the polling workers, and there was no one behind me, and I was the 8th voter at 7:25 at my poll. So, and this is on I usually you would think big 20 or 30 people by then. You would think at least one a minute. When the poll's over.
Yeah, I had to wait till later in the morning because I had to go up to the city to hang out with Scott Mitchell over at the Will Rogers to do his show. So I didn't get to vote until about 10 a.m. And there were about 600 people who had cast ballots ahead of me over in Ward 73 in Norman, which is basically that ward just north of Brookhaven. And for a presidential election, that's a 2,300, 2,400 vote turnout precinct. So 600 by lunch was running a little low, but I had 5 or 6 people in front of me, about 10 people behind me. So there were folks who I think delayed voting, but also with the weather, we knew it was coming. We have that 4-day early voting period. And, you know, if you really want to get out there and vote and you think weather is going to be an issue, you have ample opportunity to go vote. And one thing we may need to think about in this state, when I lived in Louisiana, state elections were always on Saturdays. And so we would have primaries on Saturdays, and anything that wasn't federal, we'd vote on a Saturday. And so it was like a voting holiday. We had really good voter turnout because we didn't have to compete with the workday for a lot of voters. You know, one thing we ought to be thinking about as a state, and maybe even as a nation, is the notion of a voting holiday. If we really value participating, and we recognize that voting is a fundamental right, and it is, we need to facilitate that. I mean, every person is imbued with sovereignty, right? And they have the opportunity to express it. So
Well,
let's make that possible.
But I think we're also entering an era and a generation of young people that aren't necessarily thinking they have to do things in person. I mean, you know, people don't have to go to the bank anymore.
Yep.
You know, my parents' generation did. I go less than they did, and my kids don't even know where their bank is. and so, you know, you could certainly vote on the internet, and I think someday that's going to be the norm. And you would think they could figure out the security issues involved there. But I think that's going to ultimately be the answer, and that's going to alter, you know, turnout and elections dramatically if you ever did that. Because currently, almost half the voters in Oklahoma are about 65 years of age, and you make voting on the internet available, and that number is going to swing down dramatically, I would guess.
Yeah, and you know, and Mick, you're getting at a very good point that's important to this midterm nationally, which is that the electorate was about 10 points grayer this election, and you know, for the three of us, that's just a given. 10 points grayer in this election than the presidential election year was. The share of the vote that came from voters over 50, over 65 was 10 points higher because young voters didn't turn out, they didn't show up. And part of this goes to a failure of the national Democratic turnout strategy. What they did, NPR had a piece about a week after the election on this issue. What they had done is, instead of going after people who they knew would vote Democratic but were low propensity voters, they went after people who they thought were high propensity voters but needed to be persuaded. Now, given the choice of knowing someone who agrees with me and persuading them to go vote, or knowing someone who's going to go vote but having to change their mind, I think I'd rather just take the truck out and start loading up low propensity voters and haul them in the way my grandfather did in rural Kentucky and get those ballots cast. I mean, they call it hauling for a reason, right? You haul that vote. You know these people are going to mark it up and vote the right way, so you need to go after them, and that's how you get your turnout up. And you know, Mick, I think you're absolutely right. This is the thing with young voters, and for Oklahoma City in particular, city of Oklahoma City in particular, you know, the metro is going to be half of the state in 30 years, easily half of the state. And city of Oklahoma City is only going to keep growing, and it keeps getting younger and more vibrant. But if those folks don't vote, they're going to find that their city government, their county government is increasingly constrained by a state government that's accountable to rural, older voters. And so, you know, it's governing. You can either participate in politics or you can have it done to you, right?
That's right.
And that's the choice that has to be made.
Keith Gaddie is a political scientist. We'll talk about the elected officials and what we think they'll do now that they're elected to office when we get back on The Verdict.
When you have something important to communicate, it becomes clear that there's a lot of competition for your audience's attention. So how can your message stand out and actually resonate with your audience? Legal Graphics has the answers. The team at Legal Graphics will work with you to plan, design, and even test your presentation to ensure your message will be heard and remembered. Call Legal Graphics today to schedule an appointment. The readiness is all.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank first. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
Welcome back to the set of the verdict. Our guest is political scientist Keith Gaddie. Let's talk about the governor's race. What do you think specifically about that one?
Well, you know, it was actually a fairly tame race. I mean, Joe Dorman ran better than Jerry Askins did 4 years ago and did it on a fraction of the money.
Did that surprise you, by the way?
Well, not especially. I mean, I had expected Joe to run 41 to 44%, so he ran a little bit lower than where I thought his ceiling was, but he ran generally in the area where we thought he could hit. Governor Fallon ran at 55%, and in chatting with people back in the summer before we knew what Dorman's charge was going to look like, 55 was a floor that most people were putting on the governor, even though her approval rating was below 50% and her re-elect number was never above 53. If you were to go back and look at the polls that Bill Shepard was doing and you netted out the undecideds, it usually came in at about a 53-41, 55-41 result, so not especially surprising. The governor made a very general case for re-election. You know, it was not a deep campaign. It was a very general incumbent re-election campaign, some very general credit claiming that, you know, it was a little bit wiggly. I mean, we haven't really ever cut taxes in the last 4 years. We keep trying to cut taxes, but then what happens is, you know, Jerry Fent, the fourth branch Oklahoma government, goes in and sues the state, and we lose our tax cut. But you know, the governor's campaign was the type of campaign it was because the result for them was really never in doubt. And Ed Goaz, the governor's consultant, is one of the best pollsters in the nation. And so I'm assuming that their tracking and their numbers indicated that they never really had to hit Joe Dorman hard. I mean, they tried to they tied him to President Obama. They called him a liberal, which is the playbook nationwide for the Republican, but not especially surprising.
And if this is her last election, she never lost.
Right.
Very few candidates can go through a lifetime of politics and never have a loss.
Well, you know, I couldn't do it. I'm impressed. You know, this is the thing about Governor Fallon is that she will show up and campaign hard. She spent 20 years doing every rubber chicken dinner, every fundraiser, every event for everybody around the state, and built a lot of loyalty. And you can't deny that. And she digs in campaigns. You're not going to outwork her.
That's right.
You know, only if you don't sleep. But I'll tell you though, Joe Dorman, with not a lot of money, being a little-known state lawmaker, he comported himself really well. He almost won Oklahoma County.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit. The margin was very close, apparently.
It was. I mean, just a few thousand votes would have flipped it the other way. Biggest county in the state almost went Democratic for governor. And here's what's interesting is, if you go back and look at the history of Oklahoma, you go back all the way to the 50s, Tulsa County and Oklahoma County usually run 10 to 18 points more Republican than the rest of the state. And starting in 1994, that number started to narrow. And finally, with Governor Fallon's election, the rural areas were more Republican than the two major urban counties. And now, it's this tremendous difference, about an 8-point difference the other way. So what we're getting is we're getting a politics in this state that looks like a lot of the Midwest or the coast in a way. The urban areas are more Democratic, more diverse, younger. The rural areas are older, whiter, more conservative, more Republican. This bodes well for the Democrats down the road because Oklahoma City is where the growth is. I mean, the metro will be half the state. In 3 decades.
How did the Tulsa Metro margin turn out? Do you know?
I don't know. I need to go back and look. But again, with Tulsa was less Republican than the rest of the state, is my recollection. Probably not as close. Dorman was probably less present up there. I know there were efforts by the Dorman campaign to make inroads with Republicans in Tulsa, especially with the business community, and I don't know how far they got. It's worth noting Joe Dorman out-fundraised the governor in the last quarter of the election. In terms of hard money contributions to campaigns, he raised money even with an incumbent governor. That's impressive. Again, for a guy who in no previous election ever raised more than, say, $50,000 to run re-election for state rep, to raise nearly $900,000 in the last quarter that is no small feat. We may not be through seeing Joe Dorman.
What type of senator will James Lankford be?
James Langford is going to be an impressive senator because he was already an impressive congressman. When Langford was elected to the U.S. House, he was the, even before he was elected, he was the one candidate for CD5. And Mick, you know how competitive that district is. I mean, there's a lot of talent in this district. And he beat a lot of talented people. But he was the one guy who had requested all the case books from Congresswoman Fallon's office, had sat down and done briefings with their staff. The guy loves policy. He loves doing things. He's very passionate and engaged with important issues. I had the chance to speak with the senator-elect the day after the election, and I think that national security, homeland security issues are going to be very important to him. This is an area that's actually very important for Oklahoma. We have a lot invested in our economy and homeland security and in national defense. So having a congressman who is dedicated to those issues is going to be good for us. But he's a serious man. He's a good man, but he's a serious man. And I think we're going to get nothing but hard work out of him.
And Colonel Russell, new congressman?
Colonel Russell, new congressman, and this is going to frustrate ideologues, but we know from Congressman-elect Russell's record as a state senator, he is independent. He will make decisions based upon what he thinks is right, based upon his ideology and his values and his experience. And sometimes that can frustrate some interests in the state, including conservative interests. So I think we've sent a very independent lawmaker to Washington, and again, a man who has expertise and will be interested in defense issues. Even though Tinker and Fort Sill are not in his district, you know, the entire delegation is invested in our defense economy, and we're the one state in the country that's never had a major BRAC effect. We've never had a major base closing in this state. In fact, we've benefited from base closings. So I think for these lawmakers down the road, defending Altus, you know, defending our installations up in Enid, down in McAllister, is going to be very important, even if they're not in their district. They're going to have to take a role in this. Fort Sill and Tinker will be fine. I mean, they have unique critical missions that can't be replicated anywhere else in the U.S. But I mean, these are going to be lawmakers that will be important, not just because of the patriotic dimension of the defense issue, but also because this is important for our economy, locally and statewide.
Insofar as Colonel Russell's race is concerned, it probably is not the first time it's happened. It's the first time I remember seeing it. Television commercial with a Democrat and a Republican on together, endorsing him and calling it a bipartisan support. I mean, it was. You had one of each. That makes it bipartisan. But that was an interesting television commercial. I'd not seen one like that in Oklahoma before.
Here in Oklahoma, I've never seen anything like that. The closest we would come to that is a couple of years back when Senator Coburn ran for re-election. He ran promoting his ability to work with Barack Obama. And that's probably the next weirdest thing that I've seen in a commercial in the state recently. I mean, of course, of course, the best ads always come from Freddie Davis, you know, the bug zapper and all that stuff. So Jim Inhofe always has the best ads. But yeah, that's a different one. But it points to an issue that's always been an issue for me, and also for my best professor and my boss, David Boren, which is finding a way to get people past the smallness of party politics to actually look at a problem and find a solution. And I think when I look at Congressman Russell and I look at Senator Langford, even though they are very conservative individuals, I think that solving problems is important to them. And I think we're going to see a lot of good hard work out of them.
David Boren was on our show about a month ago and spoke about open primaries. Could you explain to the viewers what that is?
We just have about a minute.
Okay. Closed primary means you have to be registered in the party to participate in the primary. An open primary means that...
That's what we have now.
That's what we have in Oklahoma. In fact, we have one of the most conservative, one of the most constrained primaries in the U.S. The way an open primary works, they use it in California, they've used it in Louisiana for 40 years, is you go in to vote, your party registration doesn't matter. You look at all the candidates on the ballot, regardless of party, you pick the one you want. Top 2 vote getters, regardless of party, go to a runoff. So if I'm living down in Norman and I'm an independent, so I don't get to vote for anything except judges and bond issues, it gives me a voice in looking at a broader array of candidates, and it opens up the electoral process to more voters and to more people. But you have to have a group of people making laws that want to open up participation.
So in November, you could have 2 Republicans or 2 Democrats on the ballot as opposed to one of each. That's
absolutely.
The bottom line. Okay.
Yeah.
Keith, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks again.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Kent and I'll have a final word after this.
All children deserve a life of hope and love. but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be Mom and Dad to me.
We are a very conservative family, and we believe in old-fashioned family values. We have a loving home there, and we love kids, and we have 5, 6 of our own. And but I had no idea we were going to go into adoption, but it's been very gratifying.
You will always be Mom and Dad to me.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information. And for almost 30 years, Oklahoma political, government, and business leaders have turned to the McCarville Report for accurate, reliable, inside information. Visit the McCarville Report online.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. We are wrapping up a show where Keith Gaddie, a political scientist, was our guest. And we look back at the November elections. Keith had a perfect score. He came on earlier and predicted how they would come out and didn't miss any. And, you know, I guess 2 years ago we would have thought, yeah, I don't know that the state could be any more red. And then you look at the results and you look at the state Senate, you think, well, it did. Apparently it can get more red.
Yes.
But Keith made some good points about how the urban areas are starting to look more centrist. And with the urban areas growing in population, perhaps that's going to be the future of the state.
Well, it really is interesting that Oklahoma County, that's all I know anything about. I don't know how Tulsa came out, but Oklahoma County was so close on Mary Fallon's race and Joe Dorman's race. That really did surprise me. I didn't expect to see that.
It'll be interesting to see if Mary Fallon ever runs for anything else again. It'll be interesting to see if Joe Dorman runs for anything else again, including governor.
Yep.
Well, that's going to do it. Would love for you to go to our website, theverdict.tv, and tell us about a guest you'd like to see on a future edition. But for right now, we'll just invite you back next week. For Kent Myers, I'm Mick Cornett, and we'll see you then.